Folks, welcome back to the Forge. Welcome back to Blood, Sweat, and Steel. We're actually in the Forge finally after a very long, hot summer of me not being able to go near my Forge because I would have died of dehydration. But here we are again. And back with part two of Forge magic, occultism, and blacksmithing. And I thought it would be fun to tell you guys a folk story from the Forge. One of the oldest folk stories on record, actually, and this is demonstrably true. I'm going to link in the description the article that I referenced for this particular episode. It came from folklorist Sara Garcia de Silva and an anthropologist, uh, Jamshed Jamshed. I'm going to include the spelling in the description as well because I don't want to butcher his name any more than I already have. But basically, this is the story that is traced back using a method that I think is called uh, phylogenetics. It's basically the study and analysis of languages, their origin, and in this case, Indo-European language, which is traced back to a root, like origin language, which is a method they use to trace like a couple hundred folk tales, and 75 of them dated back way, way older than anybody had ever really expected them to be. And this one in particular dates back, according to this research, between 5 and 6 thousand years. That's in the Bronze Age in Europe, and it has been told and retold more times than I could even begin to try and guess at. But it usually involves, well, it always involves a blacksmith, and usually involves an evil spirit of some sort, such as a jinn, a genie, or death itself. In the most recent tales, most recent retellings after Christianity got its hands on it, the evil spirit became the devil. And this story became known as the Tale of the Blacksmith and the Devil. And that's actually a fairly interesting and entertaining version, so I'm going to go ahead and go with the Christianized version because it's the most recent and recognizable one. And by recent, I mean it's still over 1,500 years old. But the story basically goes, once upon a time, there lived a blacksmith named Amish. And Amish was kind of an asshole. He didn't go to church. He didn't pay his tithings. He wasn't particularly nice or generous. Wasn't very charitable at all. And he just worked in his forge and drank whiskey. And one day, St. Peter came down to check on Amish. Said, Amish, we're worried about you. We've heard some pretty bad things, and we can see that they're true. So I'm going to try and help you. The way I'm going to help you is I'm going to give you 3 wishes. Use them wisely. These are the only ones you're ever going to get. We don't usually give this chance to everybody, but, well, we rather like blacksmiths up here. So we want you to have the best shot that you can. And he says, okay, well, since you're going to make me the offer, you see that sledgehammer over there in the corner of my forge? Well, it goes missing from time to time because the kids in this village have a tendency of taking it without my permission and throwing it around as a bit of a game. And it usually gets lost in the bushes, and I have to go and find it. And by the time I find it, it's covered in rust. Well, for my first wish, Anybody that touches that hammer has to keep hammering and hammering and hammering until I say they can stop. That's a terrible waste of a wish, said St. Peter. But if that's what you want, it's granted. Anybody that touches that hammer has to keep hammering, and they can't let go of it, and they'll keep hammering and hammering and hammering until you say they can stop. Right. What is your second wish? Now, Amish, choose wisely because you're not going to get any more than these. Amish says, yeah, well, the kids, the people in this town, this village, sometimes that chair over there, they'll sit in that chair. Now that chair's there because blacksmithing's hard work, and sometimes I need a rest. And the people who sit there won't get out even if I ask them to very politely. So for my second wish, anybody that sits in that chair cannot get up unless I say they can. Amish, you're being a damn fool, says St. Peter. That's a terrible wish, but a promise is a promise. It's granted. Anybody that sits in that chair can't get up unless you say so. Amish, this is your last wish. You better be wise about this, says St. Peter. Well, Amish says, well, you see this here whiskey flask? Well, when I'm taking my rest, I like to have a sip of whiskey. Blacksmithing's hard work, and a man needs to refresh himself once in a while. So anybody that takes a sip of this whiskey that I don't see, anybody that takes a sip of this whiskey that isn't me is drunk up by the whiskey flask and sucked inside of it and trapped inside of it until I say they can get out. Amish, Amish, you are such a fool, says St. Peter. You've wasted all your wishes. But a promise is a promise, and I am a saint, so I will grant it. I worry for you. And with that, St. Peter disappeared, and Amish went back to work. And a few days later, Amish had a visitor in his shop. And of course, it was none other than the devil himself. He says, Amish, your time's come. You have to come with me. Amish sighed and said, well, I knew this day would come. I'll tell you what, though. I'm almost finished making these horseshoes for Mrs. Jeffries. The horse is throwing all its shoes, you see, and I hate to leave a job undone before I go, so if you help me, we'll be done with this work in no time at all, and I'll be off to hell with you, and as soon as you can, just as soon as you like. William says, "What?" The devil says, "Well, all right. If it gets you into hell sooner, I'll help you. What do you need me to do?" He says, "Well, I need you to pick up that sledgehammer there and hammer for me, so while I'm working the steel, while I turn and hold the steel with the tongs." The devil says, "Okay," and as soon as he picks up the hammer, he found that his hands were fastened to it. He couldn't let go, and the hammer began swinging itself all on its own, faster and faster and faster and faster, until it was lifting them above the ground and slamming them onto the ground at a rate of speed that would make a modern day jackhammer jealous. The devil says, "Amish, your hammer is possessed. Make it stop, and I'll give you anything you want." Well, it took Amish a while to compose himself because this was clearly the funniest thing he'd ever seen in all of his life. And the poor devil was being beaten black and blue to not a single inch of his skin that wasn't bruised, and quite a few bones had been broken. And by the time Amish finally got a hold of himself well enough to say, "All right, if you'll give me anything I want you to go away for 7 more years and give me all the whiskey I can drink until you come back. And I don't want to see you again for at least 7 more years." "All right, I promise," says the devil, and with that the hammer stopped, freed itself from his hands, and dropped the devil in a loud thud on the ground, who then proceeded to crawl away out of the blacksmith shop and back to hell for another 7 years. Those 7 years had gone by, and the devil came back. And Amish was working on his shop on a sickle. And the devil says, "Well, 7 years is up, and you've had all the whiskey you can drink. It's time for you to come with me." "I know," says Amish, "but I'm in the middle of a job, and I hate to leave a job undone before I go." And the devil says, "I'm not touching that hammer, Amish. You can forget it. You're coming with me. Don't worry, I don't need your help for this. I just got to sharpen this here sickle so that Mr. Thatcher can cut his wheat." Says, "Okay." Says Amish says, "Why don't you sit down over in that chair over there and take a load off? I'm sure you've had a busy day collecting souls for help. I'll be done in no time. I've just got to sharpen this here sickle." So the devil sits down and finds immediately that he is unable to get up. And Amish banks the coals on his forge, walks out of the forge, shuts the door, and doesn't come back for over a week. And hell was probably very quiet for 7 days. And Amish come back a week later. He opens the door of the shop, lights the lantern, and sees that the devil is still sitting there in the chair. "What do you want this time, Amish?" "Well, since you're asking so politely, I want 7 more years and all the whiskey I can drink." "All right, fine." I says, "Well, in that case, you can go." And the devil got up and walked away rather indignantly back to hell for another 7 years. And Amish was again working in his forge when the devil came back. He says, "Amish, it's been 14 years behind schedule. It's time for you to go. I'm not waiting for you to finish anything. You're coming with me." "Well, all right, but I don't suppose you'd mind helping me finish the last of me whiskey before we go." "No, I suppose not," says the devil, and as soon as he goes to take, and Amish hands him his flask. And upon placing it against his lips, the devil is immediately sucked inside the iron flask and trapped. And Amish corks the iron flask, throws it into his forge, and begins working the bellows harder and harder and harder and harder until the coals are white hot, and the devil shrieks out in pain, "Amish! Amish! It's hotter than it's ever been in here. It's hotter than the fires of hell in here. Let me out, and you'll never see me again for the rest of eternity." "Well, since you offered so nicely," said Amish, "I suppose you can go, and I never want to see you again." And the devil came out of the flask, skin burned red. If you ever see the depiction of the devil with red skin, well, now you know why. But that'll about do it for this video. Next video, we'll have another story for you. But for now, bye-bye.